Hey friends, it's Sarah, and I read Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday, and I'm going to break it down so that you don't have to read it as well. I know it's been a few months since I last made a video. I took a little bit of a break and then it turned into a long bit of a break. But I have this big video for you now, so please forgive me. And I hope that I will be making some more videos again, probably not as consistently as before. But I do want to find some joy in making videos and continuing to put them out for your viewing pleasure. So thanks for sticking around if you're still here, and welcome if you're new here. But let's get into this. So, like I said, I read Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday, and I had to talk about this, and you'll see why. But we're gonna do this in the style of Mike's Mike, Cari Can Read, Lexi, or Newlynova, and I'm gonna break it down with a nice little corkboard murder board so that you don't have to read this book, and I'm gonna give my take on it as a Canadian reading about a Canadian. Before we start, a couple of trigger warnings for eating disorders, death of a spouse, which is mostly off page, as well as emotionally abusive parents. And of course, if you loved this book, then that's totally fine. Nothing doesn't say anything about you that I didn't like it, but if you don't want to hear someone say kind of mean things and rip it to shreds a little bit, then this might not be the video for you. However, if that sounds like your cup of tea, then buckle in, because here we go. So, to start off, our main characters are Aurora, Rory Lake Evans, and Mike McKenna Martin. Rory lives in Minnesota, teaches jazz and tap dance to children, works at Starbucks apparently, but it's never on page, and is struggling financially, aren't we all? She's a little bit of a loner, but is best friends with Gretchen, who runs the dance studio that she works at, and this is her only friend, maybe ever. She also knows nothing about hockey. That's important. Mike, on the other hand, is a Canadian hockey player in the NHL. His wife, Sarah, died 7 months ago, so he's currently a single dad raising Olivia, who is, I think, 12. That's my best guess. And he's Canadian. Did I say that? He's so Canadian. Like, he's so Canadian. He's really Canadian. He's a Canadian because he is the Canadian boyfriend. So, at the beginning of the book, in the prologue, Mike and Rory meet when she's 16 and working at a coffee shop in a mall. Some things never change, I guess. And he's in town for a hockey conference. They have a little flirty moment when she gives him his coffee, and then they just never see each other again. That's it. They have like 2 minutes of interaction. Crucially, she thinks that he looks old for a teenager, mostly because he has a good beard, but decides that him being in town for a hockey tournament must mean that he's a high schooler. Because even though she doesn't know anything about hockey, she knows that the hockey tournament's a high school thing. I don't know. But Rory decides to make him the basis for her fake Canadian boyfriend. We're gonna fast forward now 13 years, and Rory is about to teach a dance class, and this is a tap class because, traumatic backstory alert, she's a failed ballerina. And she doesn't teach ballet. One of her students, Olivia, is rejoining them after her mom, Sarah, died, and she's back after 7 months. She shows up with her dad, who looks shockingly like Mall Mike from when Rory was 16, and Rory is so thrown off by this that she literally falls at Mike's feet. But no, he couldn't be the same guy. Mall Mike had a beard, and this Mike has dimples. Must be a different man. Can't be the same guy. Mike helps Rory up, and they have some little flirty banter. The dance moms, who are always lurking and are super judgy, and also are maybe trying to get with Mike now that he's newly single, I've been watching intently and are just preparing themselves to attack. Because of his wife dying, womp womp, Mike has to update Olivia's emergency contact form, and this is obviously upsetting for him, and the dance moms, they can smell weakness. They're gonna pounce. Rory heroically fends them off and distracts them by asking for opinions on the children's costumes, which is apparently the dance mom's only weakness. When Mike hands back his form, he has not only crossed out his dead wife's name, but also very intensely scratched off his mother-in-law's name from the form, which is kind of interesting because, you know, is that grandparent beef I smell? Yeah, It is. Rory is still trying to figure out if this Mike is also Mall Mike and therefore the basis for her fake Canadian boyfriend Mike. He's 34 now, so he couldn't have been 18 like she thought at the mall 13 years ago. Obviously, she has forgotten that she just like made up that number and completely guessed at his age when she was 16, because that plus the dimple/beard gate are the only things that have her convinced that this man could not be the same as this boy. Real logical decisions being made here. Also, just like a side note, throughout the book, just to remind you that she's always an answer, even when not in the studio, she says cute little quirky things in her internal monologue like, "Holy shit with 3 grand pliés," you know, the way the dancers talk. After the first dance class, which happens in between chapters and therefore off page, Mike offers to give Rory a ride home. He's got a green convertible which matches his eyes, and this is something that Rory has noticed and blurts out to him. But before Mike can respond, Olivia says it's their depression car, and this quirky turn of phrase is left as a mystery for the time being. Mike and Olivia continue to give Rory a ride, and the following week they all go and get ice cream together. Bonding. This brings up our second element of Rory's dramatic backstory. Her controlling mother basically gave Rory an eating disorder, and because of this, Rory has never eaten ice cream before. She has a near orgasmic experience when trying mint chocolate ice cream. It was as if all my senses had, unbeknownst to me, been muted, and someone had suddenly cranked them up to 11. No, not someone, something. Mint chocolate chip ice cream. Cold, sweet, mentholy, perfect. Goosebumps rose all over my skin even as a wave of warmth that felt like relief radiated through my body. The world looked brighter as my vision sharpened. I felt like a superhero. I still didn't know what my superpowers were, but I was pretty sure they were rumbling to life, conjured by mint chocolate chips. Super weird, incredibly bizarre, but it will come back later, so just, hold that in the back of your mind as we go through this. Mike notices her honestly super weird reaction and asks what's wrong because he misinterprets it, and to distract from all that zaniness, she asks about the depression car, and it turns out Mike bought the car so that he and Olivia could do daughter-dad driving trips, and despite Sarah having died in a tragic car accident, traumatic backstory number 1 for Mike, it is their favorite bonding activity, which, I mean, you go reclaim your trauma, I guess? I don't know. This is also the point in the book where we see the first letter that teenage Rory wrote to her fake Canadian boyfriend, Mike. Not only did she use him as an excuse to get out of social situations that she wasn't actually wanted in the first place, she also used him like a diary, and these letters are always kind of tragic, and they only get worse as the book goes on. This one basically says that she's feeling pressure from her mom to quit her job so that she can focus more on her ballet and her schooling, and she signs off each of these letters with the phrase, "Love you to the moon and back," which is so sad, it feels almost pathological. The next chapter is a surprise because it's from Mike's perspective, and this is a dual point of view, folks. Who would have known? The first few chapters were all from Rory's point of view, but here we go. We get some hints that maybe things weren't so great between him and his dead wife, and it's all very vague and angsty. I'm sure it'll come up later. But he also considers Rory one of the best things in his life, despite having spent maybe like 10 hours total with her, which kind of tells you like where he's at in his life. Most people with long hair put it up to ride in a convertible, but Aurora did the reverse. Like the Snoopy bracelet, it was another quirky thing about her. Sir? So, he likes his women quirky, like every single book boyfriend ever. The trio go out for dinner at an arcade place, and Rory once again has to fend off some overeager women. This time they're hockey fans though. Mike, he really doesn't like it when people presume to know him just because they're a fan of his hockey playing. This isn't exactly a traumatic backstory, but it does explain a lot of his issues, so it's up here too. Mike reveals that he actually has a proposition for Rory, and that's why he's taking her out to dinner. He has a trial for his hockey career, and he wants to know if she would consider driving Olivia home from dance class and babysitting her until his friend/teammate's wife, Lauren, can watch her. If she agrees, he's going to give Rory a car and pay her a salary, and that sounds pretty sweet to me. But they start discussing the logistics, and Rory does that quirky fun thing that Mike likes so much of randomly changing the subject in the middle of a discussion by asking an unrelated question. She asks if he went to college because she's still trying to figure out if he is Mall Mike, and he doesn't know where this comes from, but it allows him to conveniently info dump his history to us, which is just a list of different teams that he played on and is basically irrelevant for our purposes. Rory actually agrees to the arrangement, but refuses to take the salary, saying that the loaner car will be payment enough. And this is where we get a hint of more of her traumatic backstory. She really doesn't like taking money from other people. But, you know, we'll come back to that later. It's in here somewhere, I'm sure. Mike's one condition in this deal is that she must never lie to him. He's very intense about this. And what's that? Is that maybe some of his traumatic backstory on the horizon? We'll get there next chapter. This lying clause makes Rory wonder if she should mention that they met once 13 years ago for like 2 minutes, but she decides against it. This is obviously going to be the catalyst for the third act breakup, and it's not subtle. Just a side note, but Mike has a dog who's missing his back legs and has one of those little doggy wheelchairs. It's very sweet, not important to the plot, but it was one of my favorite things in this story, so I just wanted to give it a little shout out because it's one of the few good things there. Anyways, this chapter ends with Mike reflecting on how his relationship with his daughter is strained and how he found a box of Riclipsin pills in his wife's stuff after she died. And traumatic backstory alert, these are not only birth control pills, but the source of all of his angst about his dead wife. So, they're up there too. The very last scene in this chapter is him cleaning up his dead wife's shoes from the front hallway because Aurora Evans was going to need a place to put her shoes. No foreshadowing here. This next chapter might as well be called Trauma Dump because it's where we're going to reveal a lot of the traumatic backstories of these two characters. Rory admits that she gets panic attacks, but has coping skills to deal with them, and these attacks are mostly ballet related, and she's cut ballet out of her life pretty much entirely, so they're not super common, but they're there. Mike then goes on to admit that Olivia isn't his biological daughter, and that he met Sarah when she was 1, and so he's always considered her his daughter because he raised her. So that's up here too. We also find out that his dead wife's parents, these guys, tried to take guardianship of Olivia even though Sarah's will said that she wanted Olivia to live with Mike. And this is the grandparent beef that was referenced earlier in the text. So that's up here too. Now, Mike ended up winning custody because Olivia went to the mediation sessions with the grandparents and said, I want to live with my dad, which makes sense. To really hammer home the trauma, we get another sad letter from teen Rory about her first panic attack when she couldn't fit into another ballerina's costume as an understudy. It's that great panic attack eating disorder combo right there, folks. She then basically admits that she bought herself the Snoopy charm bracelet that she still wears as an adult and that Mike thinks makes her super quirky to symbolize her and fake Canadian boyfriend Mike's first kiss at Camp Snoopy amusement park. Like I said, more tragic than the previous one. Also, so weird that she's still wearing this bracelet as an adult. But don't worry, it's fine. We never get an answer as to why she still wears it 13 years later. So it is now less than 75 pages into this book, and Mike is on the road for his hockey. We learn that his teammate Ivan and him have a public bromance, but they're actually more of a quantity time duo than a quality time duo. Okay, just say you don't have friends, but it's fine. Their younger teammate Badger is super insensitive and makes this fun little quip. Now that you're free of the old ball and chain, you gotta come out with us. Get yourself some puck bunny action. And Mike almost attacks him. Ivan stops him, and then Rory texts Mike, so he just completely forgets about the confrontation. And within the space of half a page, Mike goes from almost mindlessly decking his teammate to basically smiling and kicking his little feet over a text from Rory. That's fine. That seems really well adjusted, my dude. So Rory has texted him because she wanted to let him know that she had to replace a headlight in the loaner car that he gave her, and she refuses to let him pay her back for it, and she somehow also blames herself for it burning out on the first day that she had the car, which Like, what? You didn't even do anything to the car. So now we reveal another crucial piece of Mike's traumatic backstory. Sarah pills were so upsetting to him because they were supposed to be trying for another kid, and she did not tell him that she was on birth control, and this is why he's so sensitive about people lying to him. Oh my god. Because of all of his issues, Mike is seeing a therapist, and we love a therapized king. Good for him. But somehow there's just a real lack of emotion throughout this entire book. But the primary emotions are the panic attacks from Rory and feeling an abyss in him from Mike. Even the outburst at Badger wasn't angry. After Badger's comment, it just says, I unbuckled my seatbelt and retracted my arm in a flash, fully intending to punch him, but Ivan, with his defensive spidey sense, intercepted me. And that's it. That's the end of the confrontation. Speaking of issues, Rory breaks one of Mike's glasses and insists on buying him a whole new set as if he wasn't a multi-millionaire hockey player who can buy his own damn glasses. But you know, she's got her own traumatic backstory, and we're coming to that. Meanwhile, back in Minnesota, Rory gets Olivia hooked on the Little House on the Prairie TV show, and there's an entire chapter where it's just Rory and Olivia and Mike talking about the TV show. This then leads to Rory admitting that she's never eaten pie because of her disordered eating, and Mike starts leaving little pies in the fridge for her to try, which is cute, I guess. So far in this book, Rory has insisted that she's basically over her eating disorder and yet has refused to eat any sugar other than the orgasmic ice cream, and she confides in Mike about her eating issues, which he kind of understands. He's a pro athlete and he knows that the line between staying in shape and disordered eating can be a really tough one to walk, and so there's a nice little connection between the two of them understanding each other like that. Mike comes back from one of his trips early and finds Olivia and Rory having a little dance party, and his daughter, she's the happiest he's ever seen her. He has a nice little happy cry in the mudroom, so there's a third emotion for this book. He says, I had been judging my progress by how often I cried, congratulating myself on the fact that I did so with decreasing frequency. What I'd failed to account for was the possibility that tears could be happy. It's pretty deep, bro. It's been an indeterminate amount of time, and this chauffeuring/babysitting gig has been going well for all parties involved. However, now that Mike knows that Rory can bring his daughter infinite happiness, he wants her even more entwined in their lives. Rory, on the other hand, is currently apartment hunting because her breakup with her last boyfriend, who treated her like a doormat. Who could have guessed that she's a pathological people pleaser? He left her in an apartment that is way too expensive for her to be able to afford, even though she has 2 jobs. Remember, she works at Starbucks, even though that's never happened in this book on page or even mentioned her going to the job. It's fine. But Mike, he's got that perfect solution for the both of them. She should just come and live with him and Olivia. Not only does she make his daughter happy, but he likes that she sees Mike the man and not Mike the hockey player. This is also important to keep in mind for later. At this point, Mike says, look, I know this is maybe a little awkward, but I'm rich. That's the truth. Let's acknowledge it. But that isn't me. If I hadn't made it in the NHL, I'd be working at my dad's Tim Hortons. I'm a hoser. I just got lucky. But I'm still the same person I've always been. And this is a point, 120 pages in, that I went from kind of bored reading to being more frustrated, and I slipped closer to the hate reading end of the enjoyment spectrum. Because you see, Rory is American, so she doesn't know what hoser means, being Canadian slang and all. And Mike, he's gonna help her out, and he says a hoser is like a redneck, which isn't exactly wrong. It's not entirely incorrect, but it's not something you would call yourself. It's an insult. It's something you say when you're trash talking or chirping, more slang, people at like a hockey game, for example. No one ever self-identifies as a hoser. So just weird words. But anyways, Canadian frustration aside, Rory and Mike debate over the terms of her staying at his house, and they decide that she can have the whole walkout basement, he'll provide health insurance, and he's going to buy all of her groceries, etc. He wanted to pay her a salary as well, but since she refuses, he insists on making sure that she only works the few days a week that he actually needs her to, setting those great boundaries, making that employment contract. Good job, Mike. If Mike had been a less charitable guy, I firmly believe that Rory would have just taken this third job and received absolutely no compensation for it. But, you know, that's her own issue to work through. But for now, you know, she's a live-in nanny with no living expenses, and that's a pretty sweet gig if you ask me. So she moves into his house, and her and Mike get into a big fight because he lied to her about how the healthcare plan was going to be covered, and she's upset because, you know, he's got that whole thing about not lying because of the wife thing, and he's being a bit of a hypocrite. She realizes that not only is she standing up for herself, but she actually initiated this confrontation, and that is great progress for a former doormat. Unfortunately, she goes a little power crazy and the power goes to her head and she calls Mike dumb, which is one of his insecurities that doesn't really come up later. But apparently that's something that he's insecure about. And she apologizes and in a quid pro quo move reveals that her mom paid $200,000 for her ballet training and she feels that it's all gone to waste. And this is another crucial part of her dramatic backstory. Later in the book, she even refers to herself as an investment that her mom made, and this explains all of her weirdness about accepting money. Classic mommy issues. Mike suggests that she go to therapy, which is actually probably an excellent idea for her, and in the spirit of honesty, Mike confesses that the car that she's been driving is not actually an extra one that he just had laying around like he first said it was, but a car that he bought specifically for Rory. He says, "Well, that's my big confession. I figure I can't insist on honesty and then have this lie hanging between us." At which point, Rory thinks, this lie hanging between us, I should tell him. This would be the logical point to tell him. I did not tell him. Now that she lives with Olivia and Mike, Rory learns that they actually fight quite a lot, and she sees a messier side of the relationship. An example of that is Olivia always refers to him as Mike instead of Dad when they're at home, and this really hurts his feelings, which is fair. That's pretty brutal. At this point, Mike has a home game, but Olivia doesn't want to go watch him play hockey, which is weird because she used to love that. But Rory says she's never seen a hockey game before, and Olivia is suddenly like, I will take you to your first ever hockey game. Let me be your hockey guide. And it turns out what was really going on is that Olivia didn't want to be in the fancy booth with the wags, the wives and girlfriends, because it reminded her too much of her mom. And this is something that Rory finds out, but that Mike never could figure out somehow, never thought about it, didn't realize that maybe being with all the other moms would make her sad. He's a little dense sometimes. It's not quite himbo levels, but he's a little dense. Now, Rory has decided to take over some of the other dance classes from a less reliable teacher who just wouldn't show up to teach some days. I don't know why Gretchen didn't fire her earlier, but she's leaving now. And Rory's gonna take over her classes. Unfortunately, that teacher taught ballet classes, which we know are a trigger for Rory's panic attacks. And first day of class, she has a panic attack. Not surprising, but Mike finds her and helps calm her down. He stays with her. It's very sweet. And we have more traumatic backstory. Rory has name issues. So basically, Rory's dad left a month before Rory was born, but somehow still got input on her name. Her name, Aurora, is named after the titular character in Sleeping Beauty ballet. Her mom originally wanted to call her Odette or Giselle, which are even more ballet heavy names. Got a lot more of that ballet burden on those shoulders, but her dad convinced her to use a slightly more normal name. He also gave her the middle name Lake because he's a hippie, and then Aurora, like Aurora Borealis. So it's a little bit more of a naturey name and less strictly ballet. I have no idea why the control freak mom didn't just name her something else at this point, because she controls every other aspect of Rory's life. I don't get it. Regardless of all that, Aurora's name is just another reminder of how her mom had all these great plans for her ballet career, how she hasn't lived up to them, and how her mom made a bad investment. Mike and Rory hug after this emotional scene, and it's the first indication from either of them that they have feelings in any way about each other. This is almost halfway through the book at this point, so they had really better start developing some feelings because so far it is go girl, give us nothing. Mike gives her a little pep talk right before class, and he tells her, you're gonna give her. And this is when I decided to make this video. This is super nitpicky, so bear with me, but this really grinds my gears. First, they spelled it wrong. It's spelled with an E, not how they spelled it in the book. Second, Mike says that it means to do a really great job, and I just want to know where the author got her information from, because it does not mean that. It means to give it your best shot, to go for it, give it your all, try hard, anything like that. And I just don't know how Jenny Holiday got it wrong, because if you Google it, it all says the same thing. And the first result that came up for me when I Googled it, just to make sure I was right, was trying very hard in a noble or impressive feat. And I don't understand how it made through all the edits like this. Did you not have a Canadian look at this at all? You knew that Tim Hortons operated as a franchise system, but couldn't be bothered to figure out this incredibly basic slang? Make it make sense, y'all. And I looked it up, and the author grew up in Minnesota, which is why it's set there, but she now lives in Ontario. How did you get the slang so wrong? You live here. You do go here. And this misuse of slang is on top of Mike saying every Canadian slang ever and Rory being like, whoa, what does that mean? And Mike being like, oh, oops, silly me. You can't understand my mysterious Canadian words. I forgot. Just to compound that, here's a list of all the Canadian references in this book. We've got Tim Hortons, a double-double, being overly apologetic, a toque, a Chesterfield, giver, a Kenora dinner jacket, a hoser, maple syrup, saying a, Canadian Tire, and washroom. And the last one was also pretty brutal because you're telling me if I say washroom to an American, they're not going to understand that that means a bathroom or a restroom. It's not that different of a word. And I firmly believe that they're smart enough to pick up on that. If you're an American, let me know down in the comments if you knew that washroom was the same word as bathroom or restroom. And if not, I'm sorry, my apologies, but like, I just feel like it makes sense, you know? Anyways, coming down off of my Canadian soapbox, and we're going to go back to the plot. The next chapter is titled Emotional Labor, and it's basically just Mike realizing that he wasn't an equal partner in his relationship with Sarah, and that he maybe didn't do the emotional labor, and perhaps that is why Sarah didn't want another kid. He ends up actually wondering if he maybe kind of coerced her into agreeing to another child, and that's why she was on birth control and lying about it. Yikes. Yikes. We still really don't know enough about their relationship. We don't really find out that much more, but it seems really weird that they couldn't talk about this sort of thing. They were married for potentially up to 11 years. If Olivia's 12 and they got together when she was 1, that's 11 years of marriage. And like, you couldn't discuss that? Was Mike super pushy? It's weird vibes, and it kind of makes me think that maybe Mike is actually the villain of his own traumatic backstory. The thing that brought all of this emotional labor stuff up is the fact that it is Christmas time, and Mike is realizing that Christmas is actually a lot of work and that Sarah did all the work. So now he's gonna try to do better and to make more of an effort to take responsibility for his and Olivia's lives. And that's great. We love that character growth. I'm so sorry, Sarah, that you were not around to see this man's potential being realized. There's a genuinely sweet moment where Rory tells Mike that during the hockey game, Olivia was calling him Dad, and that made Mike a little misty because she's been calling him Mike all the time. And then Mike and Olivia do some nice reminiscing about Sarah, and it's just like these great family vibes. And then Rory reveals that she's been going to therapy and is starting to set better boundaries with her mom, which we love. Am I starting to root for these characters? Now we're going to get to the meat of Olivia's behavior with her dad. Her traumatic backstory, if you will. No fun little things on there because it's just one thing. He finally snaps when she's called him Mike, like for the millionth time, and she says, I don't want to live with Grandma and Grandpa. And it turns out that she thinks he might change his mind if she's mean enough to him and not want to take care of her anymore and ship her off to be with her grandparents. And then Mike has this realization. I saw then what she had been doing, trying to get me to snap. Poking at the edges of what she feared, like when you can't stop prodding an aching tooth with your tongue. So she's trying to get him to snap and then prove to her that he won't actually send her to live with the evil grandparents. Mike, trying to fix this misunderstanding, makes Olivia and also Rory sit down and then rushes out and comes back with adoption papers that he's had arranged for several months, and by February, she's gonna legally be his kid. And that opens the floodgates. Olivia apologizes, they have a nice little family moment, Rory is awkwardly there, and Olivia still doesn't really want to go to her grandparents' house because they actually won't stop talking to her about her dead mom and their dead daughter. So Rory suggests that she take a picture of the adoption papers so she can look at them whenever she wants and be reminded that she's going back to her dad, and Mike is like, you know what? That's very sweet, and I'm gonna go talk to Grandma and Grandpa too about this. So he talks to his in-laws about toning down the dad-daughter talk, and Grandma's like, you must feel so guilty that Sarah died on her way to one of your hockey games because she's a psychopath. And Mike is surprisingly well-adjusted. I guess that therapy is paying off, and he doesn't blame himself. She spun out on black ice, and that could have happened anywhere, which is spoken like a true Canadian. It's a little bit of his traumatic backstory that isn't actually traumatic to him, but, you know, it's still up here. Rory overhears this conversation between the grandparents and Mike and apologizes for eavesdropping, but Mike's like, "It's chill. It was more than okay. I found myself thinking again that I was glad she'd heard. Like I wanted her all up in my business for some damn reason, even though I was usually an ultra-private person." Look, Mike is not the most self-aware. He takes a while to realize things about himself and about his daughter. But dude, you've trauma dumped on Rory several times already. We're on page 170 of 362, and you're just now coming to the realization that you want Rory involved in your life? You invited her to live with you. Grab a brain, dude. After Olivia leaves for Christmas break with her grandparents, Rory invites Mike to Christmas dinner at her mom's house. Rory's all dolled up because it's a formal affair. She's got the full face of makeup, she's got her hair done up, a fancy dress. Mike, he's wearing sweats and a flannel, and he asks, "Should I change?" Because, you know, there's a bit of mismatch in the level of formality there. And she says, "No, you look great. I would have changed anyways, but whatever." And you know what? Actually, it's good for him for not changing because dinner is just the three of them. It's just the three of them, and she's dressed up like it's a black tie affair. Rory introduces Mike as her landlord, which is hilarious because there are several times in this book where they really struggle to define their relationship to each other, and this is objectively the funniest way to frame it. Mike is a champ throughout dinner and sticks up for Rory, who's constantly being belittled by her mom, who first tells her she should wear more concealer, and then suggests that her entire career is a joke. Mike, politely, because he's Canadian, slam dunks on the mom, and then they eat dinner, which is literally just turkey and microwave green beans, and that's it. And Rory was actually the one to bring out the green beans, so the mom was just planning on feeding them turkey. No wonder Rory has an eating disorder. After they leave horrifying mom's house, Mike and Rory get some fast food to make up for the absolute lack of dinner, and Mike feels so grateful to have Rory in his life. "I was suddenly suffused with gratitude that she'd come into my life. I felt like Scrooge being visited by a ghost who had turned his life around." Which is a really weird way to feel about your soon-to-be love interest. But here's the thing about Mike. He's therapized, so he can tell her things like the fact that she didn't make it as a pro ballerina doesn't count as a personal moral failing, but he can't for the life of him figure out why he likes spending time with Rory so much. Now it is time for more dramatic backstory. At this point, I really don't even know if this should be considered a romance. We're pretty much halfway through the book, and we've had more tragic backstory than we have romance. This relationship really feels like on Love is Blind when the contestants are like, "I've never been able to talk this deeply with anyone before." And it's really only one level deeper than small talk, and they think they've met their soulmate when really they just need to talk to their friends about more than surface level stuff. That's the vibe here. Rory couldn't hack it in the ballet world because she wasn't willing to keep hurting herself. They wanted her to be 105 pounds, and we don't know how tall she is, but at that weight, she was considered malnourished by doctors and kept breaking her toe from doing pointe as a result. And all this was just like kind of normal in ballet circles. So when Rory decided to quit, her mom lamented the loss of her investment. We're rehashing this traumatic backstory. And then called her daughter a coward? Out of this horrifying revelation, Mike and Rory have a conversation about their respective sports and the purity of like distilling them down to their essences without all the societal pressures. And it's actually quite a nice moment that shows their compatibility, but again lacks any trace of emotion in that entire exchange. Then, out of nowhere, Rory leans in and Mike blurts out, "Are we about to kiss?" And she smiles and says, "It seems like a pleasant and low-stakes thing to do." Somehow him being a famous rich hockey star and her being his nanny / living in his basement makes it low stakes to her. And apparently Mike is incredibly turned on based on what? Which he acknowledges to his credit, and he says, "And all she was doing was talking really close to my face." Yeah, bro, what? They agree that it's temporary Christmas insanity and they kiss, and then the chapter ends, "And I close the rest of the distance between us." A fade to black first kiss is an absolutely unhinged way to introduce the romance between these characters for the first time over halfway through a romance book. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Something I haven't mentioned yet, and this is fun, is that throughout this whole book, Rory has been referring to Mike in her head by his first and last names, Mike Martin. She has not called him anything to his face. But I thought maybe after their first kiss, he would be Mike to her. You know, it's a transition in their relationship. It's showing a greater depth of emotion between them. Alas, the next chapter, she's still calling him Mike Martin. She also describes his smile as having 3 stages, and every time he smiles in her point of view, the text says click, click, click to illustrate that, but it makes me think that his face actually makes clicky noises when he smiles, because she says the one corner goes up, and then the other corner goes up, and then he smiles more. I don't know, but in my brain, he's going click, click, click. And that is very distressing to picture in your head when you're trying to think that he is a valid love interest. Olivia is still with her grandparents. These two are left alone. Dear God. And Mike says he's going to teach Rory to skate. And she says, stand by me, to make sure that she doesn't fall. And he says, always. She tries to stop and then falls into him, and he kind of lets them both fall. It's the classic cheesy rom-com stuff. They start making out, because of course they do. And then this is how Rory describes their makeout session. He would hold my face and look at me like I was a delightful gourmet snack, and then snack. It was like snacking, long stretches of deep kissing interspersed with little nibbles and moments of backing off for sighing and smiling, but then something would flash in his eyes and his mouth would come down on mine again. This has got to be the least emotional or tantalizing description of a kiss I've ever read in a published novel. Then they just stop kissing and go back to talking, and the text tells us that it's really not awkward and it's just super normal. He randomly says that he wanted another dog, but that his dead wife said no because she would have to be the one to take care of it because he was always traveling for his hockey job, which is fair. And he acknowledges it. He says, and I got that. I mean, I'm a hoser, but I have a grasp on reality. If you're not home, you can't walk the dog. Not the hoser thing again. And then he rolls out what he literally calls my things I realized too late about my marriage sob story. His own version of the traumatic backstory. And then he confesses all the stuff that he realized in the emotional labor chapter, tells Rory about how he was a really shitty husband and didn't pull his weight in the relationship and didn't contribute properly. And that also he never checked his calendar and also did not have the household calendar on his phone. What a mess. And then Rory, in her infinite wisdom, thinks, oh, Mike Martin, he was such a good person, which is not what I took away from that conversation. I cannot get over the fact that this man was married for potentially a decade and just had no self-awareness about his role in this family and how he wasn't contributing properly. Go girl, give us nothing yet again. So now Mike and Rory go to a ball pit / arcade place because they are healing Rory's inner child. Yay, therapy! And she has literally never done a single fun thing, including going to a ball pit or bowling in her entire life because of her controlling mom, and that's more of her traumatic backstory. She was an absolute loner child, a real loser of a kid. Sadly, there is a height restriction on the ball pit, so she can't go in, which is very upsetting for her, but she does get to play some arcade games, and she falls in love with Dance Dance Revolution, which they just refer to as the dancing game because apparently they couldn't get the copyright for Dance Dance Revolution even though they name dropped McDonald's and Skee-Ball and Starbucks in this text. What kind of copyright does Dance Dance Revolution have that you couldn't get your hands on it for a romance book? Although I'm not sure I'd want my copyright associated with this book either, so maybe good call. Olivia is now coming back from her grandparents' house, so Mike decides to call off their making out like teenagers, as Rory calls it, which prompts another explanation of how she was an absolute loner child and had never made out herself as a teenager. They have a nice little New Year's Eve with their friends and Olivia, and there's yet another tragic letter from baby Rory, feeling alone in New York City at ballet school. So that's a double traumatic backstory whammy for you folks. Rory has now embraced radical honesty, and so she tells her ballet class that she had a bad time in New York City, developed an eating disorder, has an anxiety disorder that gives her panic attacks, and she takes some of them out for ice cream and acknowledges to herself that while she's doing much better, she still has issues around food, which is good. She's still working on herself. We love a therapized girly. She's getting there. She'll be okay, folks. We hope. I just wanted to take a little pause from this plot here to talk about some of the more bizarre writing in this book, because some of it is truly odd. There's this line when talking about Olivia where Mike says she was telling me the facts as she knew them, about reality as she perceived it. What? What do you mean? What are you talking about? You're just saying that she was telling me how she experienced life. Like, what? I don't understand. In another extremely baffling turn of phrase, in another example of extremely baffling writing, during Rory's point of view, she says, "He took a sharp inhalation I would have said was a gasp, except I don't know if you're allowed to call it that when it's a big beefy hockey dude doing it. This just in, folks, men can't gasp. Sorry, boys." In that same monologue, she says he was beaming those green lasers at me, which paired with the click, click, click smile makes me think that Mike is actually in fact a robot. So, you know, he's got that going for him. Furthermore, tucked into the 2/3 mark of the book is this little line where Rory says, "It sort of felt like we were partners, not in a life partner way, but in that we were united in managing Olivia, both logistically and emotionally." Which I think really sums up a lot of my problems with this book, because it seems to mostly be pushing this narrative of how connected Olivia and Rory are and how well they get along, and sacrifices any sort of romantic feeling between Mike and Rory in favor of this like mother-daughter kind of relationship that is building up. The writing just isn't romantic, and I fully believe that they could have fed a bunch of like Harlequin romance books into ChatGPT and come up with some more emotionally compelling scenes than the stuff that's in this book. Back to the plot, Mike has grown a beard because it's playoff season, and now that he has this beard, Rory is 100% sure that this and this are the same person. Mall Mike and Mike Martin are the same man. Because remember at the mall, he had this beard which covered up his dimple, which was the literal only physical difference between Mall Mike and Mike Martin. He confirms that he was in town all those years ago watching a high school hockey tournament but not participating in it, and Rory's like, "Oh my god, it's the same person," but then just doesn't tell him about it at all. She doesn't bring it up. They are texting later, and he mentions that Olivia wants to go to her grandparents' house for spring break again, and he wants her to go as well because if Olivia's gone for a week, maybe we can make out again. And Rory goes, "Holy shit," with a grand plie, because she's a dancer. Don't forget that. So now things are like super tense between them as they wait for spring break, and how does the sexual tension manifest? By them being clumsy, apparently. They keep running into each other and doing that like awkward little dance when you're trying to get out of someone's way, dropping things. But that's it. That's the entirety of their sexual tension. And I did see this in like Emily Henry's Funny Story. There was like a little bit of that kind of idea, but it was done so much better, and it really showed me why I'm talking about this book this way and not any of Emily Henry's books in the same way. Anyways, the tension's really getting to Rory, so she consults with her best friend Gretchen, who has been basically absent for most of this book other than as the employer at the dance studio. What follows is another incredibly baffling conversation. Rory starts by asking, "Were you ever sexually attracted to someone but didn't have sex with them? Someone you know, someone you could conceivably be having sex with, someone you're attracted to and who you find attractive in return?" And Gretchen's confused, and the conversation gets even weirder, and it culminates in Rory saying, "What if you knew nothing was going to happen beyond, say, kissing? Even if you would be into more, it's not on the table. How'd that make you feel?" And Gretchen just asks a question back, and Rory says, "It would be oddly freeing, maybe a little frustrating, what with all the pent-up lust, but you'd feel safe. I don't mean safe from assault, I'm not talking about that, but like," and Gretchen, I guess, understands what's happening, even though I don't, and she says, "emotionally safe." And Rory says, "Exactly." Okay, what? But then Gretchen is also just like, sex is the greatest thing ever. I think what we're supposed to get out of this 2-page conversation is that Rory has never had super great sex with someone that she had an emotional connection with, but I was just honestly so confused by this chat that they're having. I mean, it's definitely leading up to these two sleeping together, but what a weird way to talk about it. So now it's spring break and the child is out of the house so they can kiss again. Woo! And we are blessed with some not very spicy scenes that feel like they were written by a homeschooled nun. According to Rory, Mike has a signature move, and it is putting his hands on her cheeks. And I don't think you can consider that a signature move, because I would bet that most people do that. He was part of them kissing. He planted his hands on my cheeks, and with neither word nor ceremony lowered his head and covered my mouth with his. He started walking, even as we kissed, which had the effect of walking me backward. Could this be phrased more awkwardly? They do some adult activities, and it's like medium explicit, but not sexy at all. It's like rated M, but with the spiciness of a hummus. And then after he orgasms, he cries. You know, he's got some complicated feelings about having sex for the first time since his wife died. You know, that dramatic backstory. It'll get you. These two have a week-long sex spree, and Rory realizes that Gretchen was right. Great sex could be fun, funny. Who knew? Great sex could also, it turned out, make everything else better, like some kind of orgasmic Mrs. Dash sprinkled over your entire life. And then she says, after our second go-round, we went back to the laughy stuff. When he said, do you know that your orgasm face is the same face you made the first time we went for ice cream? I told you it would come back. He has connected the dots that she had an orgasm while eating ice cream for the first time. It's now the end of the week and Olivia's coming back, so they're gonna call an end to this fling. She just checks that it is a fling, and he says it couldn't be anything else. My first instinct was to ask why, but I knew why. His fear of leaks. Even if I still didn't know exactly what that meant, I understood that it was shorthand for a lot of bigger stuff. Not being ready for anything serious maybe, or not wanting to upset his hard-won balance with Olivia. I honestly don't remember him ever talking about leaks, so this was really out of left field for me, but maybe I just wasn't paying attention because at this point I was really struggling with this book. But it's wild that they've kind of agreed that it's just going to be a little fling, they're just casual sex, but Rory doesn't even seem to know why they've put that boundary on the relationship. Their discussions about these boundaries are just incredibly flimsy, and just in case you were worried, after a week of the best sex of her life, Rory is still referring to him as Mike Martin in her head and never saying anything to his face, addressing him by any name in any way, shape, or form. So that's great. Really love that part of this book. Olivia is now back, and she and Mike join Rory and her mom's annual pilgrimage to the Laura Ingalls Wilder Museum because of their Little House on the Prairie obsession. They all stop for food, and Rory's mom is trying to control what Rory eats. Rory stands up to her, which is some excellent progress. Good job, girlie. And it ends with this great line where she says, and I was gonna eat some tater tots, motherfuckers, which is, I believe, the first big swear we've had in this book. There's been a couple dams, but I think this is the first F word we've had in this book. Rory then tries to pull the same controlling eating thing on Olivia, and this is when Rory just snaps and has a full-on confrontation with her mom, and she tells her that she doesn't want to spend time with her mom unless her mom changes her attitude and her behaviors, and it's the most I've rooted for Rory this entire book. She leaves her mom with a sick burn where she says, because what you are right now is a dance mom without a dancer, and I don't think that's good for anyone. You know who else needs therapy? The mom. Mike is thinking about how much he likes Rory, and he says, when she kissed me, when she let me into her body, I really like that and would remember it fondly always. Which really sounds like something a teenager from the Victorian era would say, but just, you know what? I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. We're going to leave it at that. Rory and Mike go camping underneath the Northern Lights, the Aurora Borealis, and she claims her name in this weird spiritual experience. That resolves this part of her traumatic backstory, her name issues. So we'll just take that out there. And they both realize that they're in love with each other, but they don't say anything and they just continue to have casual sex like with the well-adjusted people that they totally are. At this point, we're 30 pages from the end of the book. We're in the home stretch and these two still aren't properly together and they have not talked about feelings with each other at all. So you may ask, Sarah, what could possibly happen in 30 pages, in the last 30 pages of this book? How can there be this much of the video left? Let me tell you. Rory, for some godforsaken reason, decides to show Mike that her binder of all the sad letters that she wrote to fake Canadian boyfriend Mike in her youth. She looked up and smiled as she closed a red 3-ring binder she'd been reading. She got up and came to me where I was hovering and said, read this, then we need to talk. She handed me the binder, pressed her palm against my chest, and said, if this was a movie, this would be the part where I'd say, I loved you before I knew you. And that's true, but what I hope you'll see is that it wasn't actually you. It was an idea of you. I know how much you don't like people reacting to an idea of you. Please understand that now I love the actual you. And you are so much better than the idea of you. And then she pushed me out the door. So rather than being an adult and actually telling him what she's showing him, she just makes him read the letters and then's come back to me after you figured out how you feel about that and we can discuss some sort of deranged book club. And remember back near the beginning when Mike said he didn't like people assuming that they knew him when they didn't really know him and they just knew the idea of him, aka the fame issues? This is where it rears its head in a big way. This is where all the foreshadowing comes to fruition. Rory doesn't even tell them that they met briefly as teens, so we have angsty Mike, who is thinking things like, the other, bigger part of my brain was utterly devastated, betrayed, angry, because it didn't matter who the Mike of the letters was, and the fact remained that she'd been playing me this whole time. My heart was broken. He thinks, reasonably, that she's known this whole time about him being famous, and that's why she's insinuated herself into his life and become friends with his child, and all of this angst could have been avoided if she literally said 2 sentences that explained what she was showing him and the context in which she was writing to him as like a diary. But she didn't. So they had this big confrontation. She finally asks him what he meant when he said he didn't want things to get leaky, and then he confesses that he didn't want to like date someone, bring that person into Olivia's life, and then break up and have Olivia go through another great trauma of losing an important woman in her life. Which is fair, you know, you gotta think about the kids. But then Rory makes this good point that maybe he's afraid actually of having people leave him and not just his child, and she gives him like the most therapized speech ever. Life is full of risks. People leave. You should know that better than most. You're afraid someone is going to leave you because without all the hockey trappings, you're not enough. So you try to prevent that from happening by curating the people who get to be around you, making sure they don't care about hockey, which ironically is the thing you love most after your family. Look. I feel like in this video, I sound like I don't believe in therapy, and I do. I love, like, therapy is great, but like, why are you speaking like this? You've had therapy for like a few months now, and you're like, I can deconstruct everything. This man's been going to therapy for at least probably a year at this point, and he can't figure these things about himself. It just doesn't make sense. Anyways, after that big talk, she leaves, and the conversation, it just to remind you, swings from him being hurt about her lies to her saying she can't do the casual sex thing and suggesting they should be boyfriend and girlfriend to her leaving, all without him having any real input into any of those points. Rory then goes and confesses the mess to Gretchen, who's really, you know, she's shining in the last little bit of this book, and she beautifully sums up Rory's tragic childhood loner times and says, racked with as yet undiagnosed clinical anxiety that manifested itself as shyness your peers mistook for snobbishness, and that explains why she made up fake Canadian boyfriend Mike to get out of social situations that like her peers didn't actually want her to be a part of. Rory continues to credit the Northern Lights for her sudden development of a backbone, moral compass, and desire to come clean to Mike, and she says, I don't know, those Northern Lights, it was like they changed me. And then Gretchen just compares them to a gel manicure in UV light, which is really hilarious. It's a nice bit of levity in this otherwise angst-ridden last like 10% of the book. Mike wisely goes to his therapist to get some actual professional therapy and realizes that maybe he overreacted, which, yes, but Rory, who knew about his fame issues, really did not explain the situation at all and just dipped, so I can't really blame him for feeling hurt and betrayed like that. Mike then decides to reread the letters when he's calmer, and he now recognizes them as the emotions of a really hurt and like sad and lonely teen. He wants to apologize to Rory, so he sends her a letter and they start writing letters to each other. Okay? They exchange 9 letters, 8 of which are sent through the postal system, and assuming that it takes 2-3 business days per letter, according to Google, they spend about a month exchanging these letters, 2 of which are literally one line, and none of which are more than like a couple paragraphs, and that's it. They forgive each other. The last line before the epilogue just says, then he ran around to the driver's side and we vroomed away. Because vroom is a verb that adult human people in their 30s use. So now we're at the end of the book, and I reread the ending of this book because it was bugging me and I was sure I'd missed something. Surely she says something about this whole situation, but no. At no point does she explain how she knew young Mike from the mall. She doesn't explain this mall meeting, and no wonder he's so upset. It sounds like she was some kind of crazy stalker obsessed with his hockey persona, and if I was given those letters, I would probably get a restraining order against her. Some of them sound straight up delusional, especially that one with the like Snoopy charm bracelet where she's made up this whole scenario where they had their first kiss and bought herself a charm bracelet, and that is not the kind of person I would want around my child. By the way, just to reiterate, we still don't find out why she's still wearing that charm bracelet. It's just mentioned in the letters, and then when he notices it to be quirky and she doesn't assign it any sort of significance, but it's also been several years since fake Canadian boyfriend Mike has been relevant, and yet she keeps it on, even though I would think that would be a reminder of how embarrassing it is to have to invent a fake boyfriend to get out of social situations. But she doesn't even look at it to be like, ah yes, those times, now they're done, it's good. She just wears it all the time. It's part of her wardrobe. It's a staple. So there's a time gap between the end of the book and then the beginning of the epilogue where I assume that they actually discuss what happened, but that's definitely something that I, as a reader, needed to see on the page, because him forgiving her without that full context feels so unhinged, and it makes it really hard for me to root for their happily ever after when this lie is still simmering between them. Anyways, it's epilogue time. Things are going well. They've been dating, taking things slow. Mike hires a nanny who isn't his girlfriend, which is a solid move, my dude. And despite having a lot of angst throughout this book about dating someone and not knowing if they would like then leave Olivia and traumatize her forever, remember his leaks, he's suddenly incredibly confident that these two, they're endgame. He says, "So we dated, though it seemed funny to call it that since I knew in my bones that Aurora Lake was a foregone conclusion." Which I guess is supposed to be romantic, but just feels blah. And this is wild because they were only having casual sex prior to this. And like, I guess as readers, we know it'll be fine because the book spent so much time showing this relationship between Rory and Olivia as like stepmom and stepdaughter. Alas, with all that relationship building, this relationship did not build, and there's just like no romance between the two of them. It just feels like Mike is like, wow, she's so good with my daughter and at life logistics, so I should keep her around. It's what every girl wants to hear. Mike has been asking Aurora to move in with him again, but she's been resisting. And on her birthday, so it's been a year since the Northern Lights and the removal of the name trauma, she agrees to move in with him. And you know what Mike's reaction is to that? Well, F me. My whole body flushed with pleasure. Not sexual pleasure. Or not only sexual pleasure, but goofy, teenage boy, she chose me pleasure. This writing drives me bonkers. We get another little time skip and then have the epilogue from Aurora's point of view, where Mike proposes to her by renting out a ball pit and a skee ball machine all for her and getting her a Northern Lights charm for her bracelet. And this is a great character-specific grand gesture that is absolutely wasted on a couple with zero chemistry or reason for being together. All of that romance is further ruined by the fact that she still refers to him as Mike Martin in her head. She has just accepted his marriage proposal. She has his ring on her finger, and she still calls him Mike Martin in her head and nothing to his face. As far as I know, she has only ever called him "Hey you," and that's it. They are going to live happily ever after now, and I really feels more like a logistical move where he gets someone to co-parent with and she gets financial security, but I guess they're in love and they're going to be fine and everything works out. The end. So that is all of Canadian Boyfriend by Jenny Holiday. You no longer have to read this book because I did it for you. And while it's not as bad as some romance books I've read, it just really picked at some of my pet peeves, I would say. And I think maybe also created new pet peeves that I didn't know existed inside my brain. But thanks for watching this video. Thanks for sticking around for this long. I'm gonna go chug a whole bunch of like honey because my throat hurts from talking for so long. But I hope to see you around whenever I post my next video. Have a great day and go read a book that is not this one. No fun little... These are not only birth control pills, Daisy, if they were on Love is Blind, just kidding, they wouldn't do anything, it wouldn't work because they don't really talk about anything. Bad, weird, incorrect words.